Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, or hello if you are new here. In today's true crime video, we will be diving into the case of the Kobe child murders, which occurred in 1997 in Japan and has often been referred to as one of the most grisliest cases in Japanese criminal history. Disclaimer, this video is a true crime case, therefore viewer discretion is advised. We will be discussing an array of themes related to true crime that may be triggering to some people, so please make a decision for yourself whether you want to watch beyond this point or not. You of course know yourself better than I do. I also just want to point out to you guys that this case has a lot of unknown information in it, so there was a lot of different sources on the internet that said different things, so I've just tried to put this case together as best I can with the most consistent information that I found online. Otherwise, let's just dive on into this case. So it was the afternoon of February 10th, 1997, and children in the local area of Kobe, Japan were dispersing from the schools and making their way home. Two of these pupils were two 12-year-old girls. I believe they were friends and they were making their way home together. As the two 12-year-old girls were walking out of their school together, they were suddenly and very randomly out of the blue attacked with a hammer by a stranger on the south side street of Kobe. The two girls managed to luckily survive the attack, despite them both, I'm pretty sure, receiving pretty decent blows to the back of their heads, and they rushed home to inform their parents of this incident that had happened. When the girls were relaying the story back to their parents, one of the girls actually said that she thought her attacker was actually wearing a school blazer and carrying a school bag. So with this information, the girl's father actually went down to the local school in Kobe and asked somebody in charge, a principal or a teacher, whether he could have a look at the school photos of all the children that attended the school, because he felt that his daughter might be able to identify her attacker that way. The school actually refused to cooperate with this girl's father, so he ended up going down to the local police station and writing up a police report. And actually, the police apparently were not actually helpful in this situation either, and no investigation began. Nothing was really looked into, which is really, really sad. I'm sure those young girls were quite traumatized from that attack, and if one of the girls is saying she believes she thought her attacker was wearing some kind of school uniform, that to me is a massive lead. It can actually, break down the location of possibly this attacker and maybe even an age bracket as well. Despite this, as I said, nothing was really looked into regarding this random attack on the two girls, and everything went quiet until about 1 month later. So about a month later, on March 16th in 1997, there was another attack on a young schoolgirl, 10-year-old Ayaka Yamashita. Ayaka Yamashita was in a local park near to her school. I believe she was on a recess from school or a lunch break or something like that, and that is where a stranger approached her in this park and asked her if she knew of a place where they could wash their hands. Ayaka responded saying yes, they can wash their hands in her school and that it was nearby. So she led the stranger to her school, and as they approached the building, the stranger said to Ayaka, quote, "I want to thank you, so please turn to me." As 10-year-old Ayaka turned around to this stranger, they immediately out of nowhere brought a sledgehammer down over her head, knocking her to the ground. The strange perpetrator then fled the scene, and people started to rush over to help Ayaka Yamashita, who was clearly seriously injured on the ground. Ayaka was then rushed to hospital, but unfortunately, due to the severity of her beating, sadly passed away at the hospital due to a brain contusion 1 week later. At some point during this same day, after the brutal attack on Ayaka Yamashita, another young 3rd grade girl was stabbed with a 13-centimeter long knife in the abdomen. She was stabbed quite badly and was rushed to hospital, but she did end up surviving, luckily enough, but she did spend 14 days in the hospital recovering. She had no idea who her attacker was, so it appeared to be another attack on a young female student. So I believe at this stage, there was a lot of neighborhood watches formed by worried parents, and children were frequently escorted to school, to and from school by their parents or a guardian, just because the people in Kobe did not feel safe with their young children walking to school by themselves. I mean, there was 2 girls that had been attacked together just walking home from school. Another had been beaten to death, and another has just been stabbed in the abdomen with a knife. So people were extremely worried in the city of Kobe. However, 2 more months went by and it went quiet. There was no more attacks until May the 24th. So on May 24th, that same year, 1997, 11-year-old Jun Ha-se was out walking to his grandfather's house on foot. Jun Ha-se was out walking to his intended destination when he crossed paths with one of his friend's older brothers. Jun had met this boy before and had been around to their house actually to play with his little brother in the past. So they started to chat on the street. The boy who was talking to Jun was on his bicycle, and he actually mentioned to Jun that he'd just been exploring the mountains just up the road a little bit, where he had actually seen some turtles, and asked Jun if he wanted to come see the turtles as well. Jun absolutely loved turtles. They were his favorite animal of all time. So he was happy to do a quick detour to these mountains with this friend or acquaintance, I guess, to see these turtles, and then he would be on his way to his grandfather's house as he intended to do. The boy on the bike then led 11-year-old Jun Ha-se up a local mountain road, and then suddenly out of nowhere just turned around and began strangling Jun Ha-se. Jun was putting up a massive fight. The boy was actually not able to strangle Jun to death, so he ended up getting Jun to the ground and began repeatedly kicking and beating him until he had appeared to pass away. The perpetrator then left 11-year-old Jun Ha-se's body up towards the top of the mountain road and quickly fled to a local DIY or trade store. If you're an Australian viewer, I'm assuming it's like a Bunnings or a Mitre 10. There at this store, the boy actually stole a hacksaw and a padlock and then quickly made his way back to where he had left the body. When he arrived back to the location, he actually sawed off a padlock that was on a gate containing a TV antenna area located on the top of the mountain. I'll insert a photo here so you sort of know what I mean. And dragged Jun Ha-se's body into this gated area. The boy then hid the hacksaw and Jun's body in this gated area and quickly locked up the gate on his way out with the new padlock that he'd stolen from the store and fled to his own house. So because Jun Ha-se did not turn up to his grandparents' house that day and never made it home that night, they were getting very, very worried, Jun's family, because he is only 11 years old and he actually also had special needs. So they were very, very worried about him, and everyone in the community was on the lookout for Jun Ha-se, and they ended up writing a missing persons report to the police the following morning. So a few days later, on the morning of May 27th, a janitor working at a local school, Tomigaoka Junior High School, made a very, very gruesome discovery. In front of the school gates, a decapitated human head was found just hours before children would be arriving to school that day. Authorities were called immediately to the scene and later identified the head as being that of missing boy 11-year-old Jun Ha-se. Additionally to finding the head on the school grounds, police also found a note written in red ink that had been folded and placed into Jun Ha-se's mouth. The note read, quote, "This is the beginning of the game. Try to stop me if you can, you stupid police. I desperately want to see people die. It is a thrill for me to commit murder. A bloody judgment is needed for my years of great bitterness." Further on the note, it actually had some misspelled English words that appeared to say school killer, and the killer actually signed themselves off at the end of this note as Sieto Sakakibara. And authorities at the time were not sure if that was the killer's real name or if it was just an alias that they were using at the time when they were writing this letter. On the note, there also appeared to be a little drawing or picture which police were still in the process of trying to figure out the meaning behind. Police's next task was obviously to locate the rest of Jun's body, so searches were being made everywhere around the school, in the school, and finally they actually located it before noon that very same day on top of the mountain near the TV antenna area where it actually had been left for the past few days. The janitor also mentioned that prior to Jun Ha-se's head being found, dead cats had actually been turning up on the school premises mutilated. So the news had spread everywhere that the police were on the hunt for a murderer and suggested that this person was most likely a male of strong build and was approximately 30 to 40 years in age. The media got a hold of the story and it went absolutely everywhere. There was not a channel that didn't cover this story. It made national headlines very, very quickly and international headlines as well. In all this rush, the media actually recounted the signature that was found on the note that was stuffed in Jun Ha-se's mouth to be signed off as Onibara, not Sakakibara, like the note actually stated. So due to this mistake, about a week later on June 6th, another note actually appeared on the doorstep of the newspaper Kobe Shimbun, and it was allegedly from the killer. The sender identified themselves as Sieto Sakakibara, which was the same name left on the note at the crime scene, and they expressed how angry they were with the media for mispronouncing their name in their previous reports. Due to this mistake, the sender threatened to kill 3 people per week and also wrote about how much they hated the Japanese education system and said that they were to blame because they shaped this person into who they were today, and also said it was because of the harsh environments and pressure and bullying. The perpetrator also wrote, quote, "If you think I can only kill children, you are greatly mistaken." Police noted that this killer may have taken some kind of inspiration from the Zodiac Killer, who was an infamous serial killer in the late 1960s who was in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they also left notes for authorities during their crime spree. They also then connected the picture or drawing in the first letter left to be a similar copy of the Zodiac Killer's signature, which is a cross with a circle around it. People started to speculate, well, maybe it is the Zodiac Killer, but it was very, very highly unlikely because this was in Japan and the Zodiac Killer was sort of around that San Francisco Bay Area, so it's not in the same location at all, and it's also 30 years on, so highly unlikely. Other people also thought that the drawing in the first letter may have depicted a swastika symbol, so there's been a few theories regarding this note's drawing. So on the following month of June 28th, the public were very suddenly alerted to the fact that the police had made an arrest on someone in relation to the Kobe child murders. Police finally announced to the public that they had arrested someone who they referred to as Boy A, and this was due to Boy A only being 14 years old. Due to being 14 years of age, this boy's name was protected as he was a minor, and the legal age of responsibility at the time in Japan was 16 years old. People were obviously absolutely gobsmacked that this boy was 14 years old and could have committed such heinous acts, and they were all under the impression that police were actually after someone in their 30s or 40s, not a child. Despite his letters that he wrote to the media and left at the crime scene signing himself off as Sieto Sakakibara, this actually was not his real name, it was just an alias that he was using. So from now on in this video, we'll be calling him and referring to him as Boy A. However, you can go do your own research. His real name has actually since been leaked and it's all over the internet, and I will be talking about it later in the video, but just during this video in the case, I will be referring to him as Boy A. So Boy A, who was a junior high school student at a local school in Kobe, has now been arrested under the suspicion of murder and abandoning the corpse of Jun Ha-se. Now, I couldn't actually find much information about how they actually found Boy A in particular. It was said that they placed him under arrest because they found similarities between Boy A's handwriting and the handwriting on the notes left to the media and at the crime scene. So I don't entirely know what kind of investigations went down just prior to the time of Boy A's arrest. I'm assuming maybe they went to the local school, did interviews with people, or maybe they compared children's handwriting to the note as well, and it eventually led to Boy A. Boy A initially denied the claims, but eventually broke down in tears to police and confessed once they actually showed him the handwritten note in front of him on the table. Boy A ended up confessing to police of not only the murder of Jun Ha-se, but also the murder of 10-year-old schoolgirl Ayaka Yamashita early that year, after also being questioned in relation to her death. Additionally, boy A also confessed to attacking and assaulting 3 other schoolgirls around a similar time, which, if you can remember, were the 2 girls that were assaulted first and the other schoolgirl who was stabbed. So boy A was a 14-year-old student living in Kobe, Japan. Boy A was allegedly diagnosed with ADHD or Asperger's syndrome. I don't know exactly which one is factual information. Both of these came up quite a few times during my research, so I won't mention it any further. Boy A says that he came from a very strict household. His mother in particular wanted him to do very well in school. He was also the firstborn son, so he felt and said that he had a lot of pressure on him to do well for his future. However, his parents have since always denied this claim that he was brought up in a very, very strict household, so take that with a pinch of salt. Despite some sources saying that boy A had a lot of friends when he was younger, he did also like to be cooped up in his room, and he allegedly wasn't the best communicator, and boy A actually said himself that he felt irritated a lot of the time. Boy A had quite different interests, to say the least, that he enjoyed to do in his spare time. He said that he liked to go out and catch frogs, and he would line them up on the road and run them down with his bike. He would decapitate birds like pigeons, and he would often find joy in mutilating cats. His fascination and enjoyment of mutilating animals was said to have started when he was in elementary school, and eventually this killing of animals was not enough to satisfy him anymore. One of his principals at his junior high school later mentioned that boy A was a more problematic child at the school. He would steal people's shoes and burn them, and there was mention of one incident where boy A hit another student over the head with a tennis racket for no reason at all. He eventually wanted to take his curiosity up a notch and was curious to know what harming and killing a human person would be like. So in February of 1996, boy A attempted his first attack on the 2 12-year-old schoolgirls making their way home. I don't actually know whether he was trying to kill these 2 girls or whether he was just trying to assault them, but they did end up escaping, as we'd already discussed earlier in the case. But this is what I believe to be the reason why the girl thought that her attacker was wearing a school uniform, because he was a junior high school student, and I don't know why he would wear any kind of school logo showing while he's doing an attack, but maybe it's just because he's, you know, a child, 14 years old, just didn't plan it properly. In March the following month, he approached 10-year-old Ayaka Yamashita and asked her for directions to somewhere where he could wash his hands. After she led him to her school to try and help him, he attacked and murdered her with a sledgehammer. Later during the investigation, authorities actually found a diary entry written by boy A about this particular incident, which read, quote, "This morning my mum told me, poor girl, that girl attacked seems to have died. There is no sign of me being caught. I thank you, Bumoida Kishin, for this. Please continue to protect me." Really sorry if I butchered that name. Sorry, I'm not familiar with that word. The reference to Bumoida Kishin, or I'm so sorry, however you say it, still sort of remains unclear to authorities, but it's clearly some kind of spiritual or religious belief that he may have had. He also wrote another entry stating, quote, "I carried out sacred experiments today to confirm how fragile human beings are. I brought the hammer down when the girl turned to face me. I think I hit her a few times, but I was too excited to remember." So he's clearly getting a lot more satisfaction and excitement out of killing people now. And obviously these are not 2 emotions that you should, you know, have being mixed together. That is a big red flag, and obviously the killing and mutilating of animals initially, I think, was a massive red flag. So a couple of months later in May, after luring and murdering 11-year-old Jun Ha-se on a mountain road and disposing of his body in a gated area, boy A actually eventually returned to the crime scene after Jun Ha-se had been reported missing to the authorities. Boy A unlocked and entered the gated antenna site where he had left the body and placed the body of Jun Ha-se on 2 trash bags that that he had brought with him. Boy A then went and fetched the hacksaw that he had hidden with the body of June Ha-se and began to decapitate the body. It was said that Boy A didn't like how tired June Ha-se looked, and he ended up gouging out his eyes, removing his eyelids, and cutting his face from ear to ear. In one source that I listened to, it was allegedly stated that Boy A may have even drank some of June Ha-se's body that was left on the trash bags that he had brought with him. And he said that he did this allegedly because he felt that drinking the blood of a pure child would make his dirty blood pure again. And allegedly he noted that it tasted like metal. After this, he left the body of June Ha-se up on the mountain in the gated antenna area and ended up taking the head home with him into his bathroom, and he was going to clean it up and make it more presentable because I think he had already premeditated what exactly he was going to do with it. After this, he proceeded to write the note in red ink that would later be found in June Ha-se's mouth at the crime scene, which he was said to have been inspired by various manga stories that he had read, and one of those in particular was actually about the Zodiac Killer, who, as we already discussed, wrote letters to police during his crime spree as well. Boy A then signed off this note in English as School Killer, however it was misspelt, and also signed it off as his alias Sieto Sakakibara. He then hid the head of his victim in the ceiling of his bedroom until the very next morning. So very early the next morning, Boy A packed the head of his victim and the letter that he had written into his school bag and set off for his own school, sneaking out of his house undetected. When he arrived to the school, Boy A tried to place the head of his victim on one of the walls or the gates that surrounded the school, but it just was too heavy and it wasn't staying where he wanted. It kept falling off. So he ended up doing the next best thing, which was just leaving it on the ground outside the school gates. Boy A then placed the written letter into June Ha-se's mouth, and he allegedly just stood there for 5 minutes, basically admiring his work that he had done. And it was said that he may have had some kind of sexual gratification towards this, which obviously is disgusting. Boy A then fled the scene, and a few hours later, a janitor who luckily got to school earlier than the children discovered the head of June Ha-se outside the school walls, and authorities were immediately called. I don't think any children saw the head of June Ha-se. I believe the janitor got to school quite early on and called the authorities, so before it was school time, before the children would be making their way to school. But I didn't read this, so I am obviously hoping that no children saw this awful, awful crime scene. As police were making investigations at Boy A's house, they actually found some explicit and violent sexual movies, games, and some kind of pornography in his bedroom. It was also reported that lethal weapons were found in Boy A's bedroom, so I'm assuming that may have been the murder weapons such as the sledgehammer and the knife, but I can't 100% say for sure. There could have been more for all I know. So after Boy A's arrest, he was held at the prosecution until around July the 8th. And then the prosecution actually ended up requesting for an extension of his detention so they could do further investigations. That was granted to them, and he was detained at the prosecution for I think a further 10 days. A few days later, the police actually escorted Boy A out to all the crime scenes so Boy A could explain to them what exactly went on there, because police knew that this was a very fragile case. They were dealing with a 14-year-old boy, so they really couldn't afford to stuff up any information. They had to definitely make sure they were making the right conclusions because this boy was so young and obviously his life would be affected after this. Another extension was actually granted to hold boy A while police made more investigations and questioned the family members. So on the subject of boy A's parents, they actually ended up writing letters of apology to all the victims' family members on behalf of their son, boy A, and it actually ended up causing a divorce between them as well, because I couldn't imagine the amount of tension and emotions running throughout that time. So it unfortunately tore that family apart. During the trial, boy A mentioned that he had been hallucinating. I don't know a lot of information about that, whether he meant that he was hallucinating during the times of his crime sprees or whether he had remembered having hallucinations throughout his whole life. So on October 13th of 1997, due to the laws in Japan at the time, the criminal age of responsibility was actually 16. So due to boy A being only 14 years old, his identity was protected and he was not convicted. Instead, he was sent to a psychological treatment facility in Tokyo and then later would be transferred to a reformatory school. There was a massive uproar in Japan about this. The public were absolutely outraged that he was not convicted because they were not so sure that he even felt any kind of remorse. It certainly didn't seem so. And actually, due to this, the criminal age of responsibility in Japan was actually lowered down to 14 years old. The media were straight onto blaming movies and gaming that showed explicit content that children in Japan were consuming a lot at that time, and they were saying that it was influencing the younger children to have violent tendencies. A Japanese politician actually also stated that he felt that parents were to blame for this and that there should be restrictions on objectionable content that children can consume. If it doesn't have any kind of literary meaning or purpose behind it, then children shouldn't be watching it. Now, during my research, there was a number of people, including the principal of boy A's school and a lawyer at the time, who believed that boy A was actually falsely accused of these crimes, and the following three reasons are why they feel this way. Reason number one was police allegedly said that one of the crimes was actually committed by someone who was a left-handed person. However, boy A is right-handed. I don't know which crime they were referring to, which murder. Reason number two was that boy A's confession seemed to have a lot of really absurd statements and claims, and people think that a 14-year-old wouldn't have been able to do that or know that. I couldn't find anything during my research that actually elaborated on this statement. I'm wondering in his confession what he was actually writing about that people think is so absurd, since committing murder is, probably one of the worst things a person can do. Lastly, reason number three, it was said that boy A had bad grades, but his confession actually was quite complex and had a lot of elaborate figures of speech and a lot of similes, which sort of didn't match his literary or education level. Despite people thinking that boy A is falsely accused of these crimes, his mother actually came and visited him in 2002 and asked him whether he did commit these crimes, and he confirmed that yes, he did do these crimes. So on March 11th in 2004, it was announced by the government that boy A, who was 21 years old now, would be released from the juvenile detention facility on a provisional basis, and that he would have full release in 2005, the following year. However, a lot of people thought that due to the severity of these crimes, he wouldn't be fit for release and would probably end up being sent to prison. However, boy A was indeed released from the juvenile detention as he was deemed cured after only serving 7 years. 7 years for attacking 3 children, murdering 2 children, and not only just murdering, but going out of your way to do more than necessary to decapitate a child and display it for the public to see. 7 years. Although he was 21 years old now, boy A's name and photograph was still not released to the public, which obviously the public were really outraged about because they didn't know who he was, and he was basically just walking as a free man around them. It was said that strict security was kept on boy A whilst he was out of juvenile detention, and his location was constantly kept up to date with authorities and actually with the family members of the victims, which I thought was, quite confronting for them. I'm sure they were trying to still grieve and move on. So if you're constantly being reminded of your child's killer, that would have been, very not easy for them to hear about all the time. However, it was said that a few years later, boy A's father actually said that he himself didn't even know where his son was. So clearly the security ended up lacking in the end. So then lastly, in 2015, boy A, who was in his 30s at the time, actually published a book. It was an autobiography style, and it actually went into deeper details of the crimes that he committed, and the family members of the victims really tried their hardest to push to have this book not published, and some major book chains did refuse to sell it. However, it actually ended up being very, very popular, and it got on Japan's bestseller list. In the book, boy A allegedly goes into more detail about Jun Ha-se's murder in particular, and he actually states that he did something more heinous than murder in relation to the crime with Jun Ha-se. And boy A allegedly also describes himself as a sexual deviant. So putting two and two together, I can only assume that there's a possible instigation that maybe some kind of necrophilia or sexual act went on. Of course, these are only speculations, but as I said in the book, he apparently does describe himself as a sexual deviant, and we know from his diary entries that he has said that he gets excited when he was killing people. So yeah, very, very disturbing stuff. Apparently the book sales actually left boy A with a profit of something around $90,000. I just saw dollars. I don't know if that's like US dollars or Australian dollars or whatever, but a large chunk of money. And the editors and the publishers said to have gone along with it because they thought it was important to have the killer's side of the story and version of events stated. I've not read the book myself, but one of the family members did say that he feels that there was no kind of remorse in this book, despite there being, I believe, some kind of apology. Also at around this time, boy A was said to have started up some kind of website, which was basically sort of like a vanity website for fans to come. It had like information about his weight and height, like personal bio information, and it also allegedly had a photo of a nude male on this site, but it looks suspiciously photoshopped. So yeah, it was definitely more like a vanity thing from my understanding, which is disgusting. And then on top of this, in 2015, a Japanese newspaper ended up ignoring the child/minor laws in Japan and actually published boy A's full name, place of work, and a photograph of him. And his full name was said to have been Shinichiro Azuma. So yeah, that's all out on the internet now. And there's actually photos of him allegedly riding the subway, but obviously I can't 100% confirm if that's actually him. So that actually brings us to the end of the Kobe child murder case. I would love to hear your comments, discussions, and opinions in the comment section down below. Please ensure that you are being super respectful in the comment section, not only towards each other, but just towards the victims and family members of this case, because this case did contain really violent crimes against innocent children. I'm always open to suggestions about other cases you might like me to cover here on my channel in the future, and if you like true crime, you're more than welcome to subscribe. Otherwise, I do hope that I see you in my next video. Bye guys.